Yeah.
Welcome to 360 Degrees of Success. I'm Jeffrey Bloom, and I have the privilege of interviewing Matt Toporowski, along with my executive director and co-producer of 360 Degrees, Jeffrey Deskovic. Thank you both for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Always a pleasure, Jeff Bloom, to team up with you and do something good, man. Whether it's the show or the nonprofit, the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. Always great to work with you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. You too. Matt he's a progressive candidate. He's running for Albany County District Attorney. He's a former prosecutor. He resigned from the current DA's office and is running to bring criminal justice reform to the state capitol. He's endorsed by the Working Families Party, and coincidentally, Jeffrey Deskovic was wrongfully convicted and spent 16.5 years in prison for a crime he did not commit, which is an amazing story in and of itself. But this interview is for Matt to kind of let everybody know what he's doing, what the important issues are for him. So, Matt, what made you decide you wanted to run for DA?
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Jeff. And Jeff, pleasure to meet you and be on the show with you as well. So for me, it really started a little over a year ago. I was representing a young man. I was appointed to represent him. He couldn't afford an attorney. His name was Kaleem Lewis. We met, we spoke about the case, and what happened was the police had executed a search warrant on a home that he was staying in, really searching for a woman. They searched for a while. She wasn't there. They kept searching anyway. And after a while, they found a gun in a Victoria's Secret woman's clothing bag in a pile of women's dirty laundry. Now, Kaleem was sleeping in this room on the other side of the room, but they charged him with the gun anyway, even though they're searching for this woman and she wasn't there, and the gun was found in a Victoria's Secret woman's clothing bag. So we had decided very quickly that we're going to trial on this case. And during the course of that trial, one of the most important aspects is obviously picking the jury and making sure you have a fair jury, a jury that reflects the community, a jury of Kaleem's peers. And I had given him a suit and tie, shirt, shoes, everything I had, so he looked his best for this trial. But during the jury selection, I realized it was going to be an uphill battle getting a diverse jury, black and brown jurors, because so many people had started raising their hands. They had bad experiences with the DA's office, and so they were excused. We came down to a man and a woman, a black man and a black woman, and they said they could be fair and impartial. They could sit on this jury. And so I knew we needed them on this jury to make sure we had a fair cross-section of the community, a fair jury, different lived experiences. But the prosecutor in that case, who worked for my opponent, David Soares, she challenged these jurors and kicked them off the panel for no reason. They said they could be fair and impartial. And at that moment, I turned around, I walked back to my table, and I remember seeing Kaleem sitting there just bent over, shrunk in his chair, all hope drained from his face. Because at that point, he knew that he wasn't going to get a fair trial with a all-white suburban jury, and we had a young black man on trial alleged to have possessed a handgun. And so that was a moment that drove me to see the complete unfairness in the system and this desire to win that prosecutors have. This prosecutor didn't have to knock these people off the jury. She was trying to hedge her bets. They said they could be fair and impartial. She had also disclosed evidence, video evidence, the weekend before the trial, literally the weekend before the trial. And this is all geared towards this focus on winning and convictions. And I knew that there was only one way to bring more fairness to really people involved in the criminal justice system, and that was to run for office and to take David Soares out and bring a more fair, progressive approach to everyone that goes through the Albany County judicial system. And that's why I decided to run.
That was really interesting. And what makes the DA's office in Albany different than any other DA race?
You know, look, it's been written about, and I think it's true. I mean, the DA's office in Albany is across the street, really, from the state's capital, where legislators are meeting, debating, talking about what laws to pass that will affect millions of New Yorkers. And most importantly here for criminal justice, criminal justice reform laws. And so the DA here can be a vocal advocate, and they're going to be heard loud because of their proximity to the legislators. They can walk across the street, walk the halls, advocate for progressive reform, Or they can do the opposite, like my opponent did, walk up there and advocate to roll back reforms. In 2019, New York took a historic step forward. It passed reforms to discovery, speedy trial, and bail reform to move this system forward to a more fair place for everybody. My opponent went up there. He participated in the fear-mongering campaign, said this made us less safe. And as a result, a lot of these reforms got rolled back. And so I'm running so that on day one, I'm walking up that Capitol, I'm walking down those halls, I'm talking to those legislators about why we need to move back forward on criminal justice reform.
I just want to add, Jeff, that, one of the key pieces of legislation that the coalition group, which I'm part of, it could happen to you. We led the charge and we passed the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct, an independent oversight board for prosecutors, in view of the fact that prosecutorial misconduct is a major cause of wrongful conviction. And one of the factors that runs through almost all the wrongful conviction cases that happen. And Albany DA Soares, in his capacity as president of the District Attorneys Association of New York, he filed a lawsuit challenging the commission in court because they didn't want oversight, and he's actually succeeded in getting the judge to temporarily invalidate the commission. Just the judge found an issue on the appeal process, so we're going to fix that and try to repass it. But my point is that he wanted no oversight at all.
Which makes no sense. And as you know, Matt, Jeff has done so much in criminal reform and trying to get things done, and you and I spoke last week about I don't see the detriment or why they're so in fear of having an oversight and being held accountable because everybody else is in their jobs.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's correct. That's exactly right question. What are they so afraid of if they're not doing anything wrong? Everybody has to answer to someone. Everybody, and that's how accountability works. To make sure people are acting appropriately, ethically, and professionally. I mean, this commission, again, it was passed by full bipartisan support by this legislator. It was lauded nationally as a step forward, the first of its kind Commission on Prosecutorial Conduct. We have one for judges in New York. This made sense to have one for the most powerful actors in the criminal justice system, prosecutors. I certainly am in favor of it and was in favor of it because, to be honest with you, Jeff, when I was at this DA's office here in Albany, I saw prosecutors cutting corners. I saw them not disclosing evidence that was favorable to the defense. Payments to confidential informants, not disclosing those payments. And I had a problem with that, and I raised that in the office. And instead of, understanding Brady material and favorable evidence, I got pushback. And that's exactly why we need a commission. And what I'll say to you is regardless of this commission, and I hope it does pass in this lawsuit that Soares has commenced to stop it, ultimately justice prevails and the commission is deemed constitutional. I'm going to put something in place in my office regardless that will be an internal compliance department on this type of evidence, prosecutorial conduct, ethical conduct. And I'm not going to stand for anybody trying to cut corners because the terrible consequences that someone could be convicted that wasn't guilty. And, I'm doing everything in my power to prevent that by putting in place in my office policies that'll do just that.
Jeff, I want to add that, the district attorney, the elected official, they set the tone for the whole office. And when they turn a blind eye away and don't discipline and ultimately fire prosecutors that commit misconduct, that sets the stage for the culture in that office to tolerate, allow, encourage misconduct and foster this win at all costs, even at the sacrifice of justice that Matt is talking about.
Yeah, Matt, before we move on, this is a question that I've always had, and it kind of goes to where we're going with the next series of questions is, when a case comes up like that for appeal, for example, and there's a question of, well, maybe this person is innocent. Why the brushback or the push off of, let's not look at this, let's do everything and fight for just keeping him or her there, extending the process, making them give up at some point, versus looking at it and say, hey, we made a mistake, let's do the right thing. Why is there such an imbalance in that?
Yeah, I think it's a reflection of sort of a traditional approach to prosecution, that you're just really there to, take the case, convict the person, and send them on their way to prison or punishment. I mean, it takes more work. It takes more effort to think critically about your job, and that it can be much bigger than that and much broader than that, and that you're actually after seeking truth, and fairness and justice and not just conviction. It takes more effort. And so once you get to this appeal process, I mean, by then it's like, it is an afterthought that they're going to go back and look at things. I mean, they're on appeal. 90% of cases are affirmed on appeal, particularly criminal cases, particularly because judges can say, well, there was a lot of other evidence here, so we don't think there was, even if there was a Brady violation, not a big deal. But it is a big deal, because if you had a proactive prosecutor in office, a progressive prosecutor, and this is how I would handle the office, looking at these cases from the inception in the beginning, that you are addressing these issues before you get to such a terrible situation that someone is in jail wrongfully and, litigating from behind bars, trying to get justice on appeal, you do it in the beginning. And so you're making sure in the office that prosecutors aren't debating Brady material. Well, it could be fair. No, just disclose it all. Disclose it all. You're a prosecutor. You know that when you walk into a courtroom, you get a lot of respect. It's a lot easier for you to say, I represent the people. This person is guilty. They did this. The jury's going to follow you. And I want fair shot for everybody. So give them the evidence. Turn it over to prevent this happening proactively from the beginning of the case.
And I also think, and we discussed this also last week, and you would agree that when this commission is up and running, and it should be, that there should be some non-attorneys on this commission, so it makes it more neutral in regards to taking a look at things from a different point of view.
Yeah, I mean, any type of commission or even community board. We have some other plans for some mental health court and some diversion units here for the new office. You want to have a broad cross section of people involved, and so my plan is in my office I'd have formerly incarcerated people, and certainly for this unit that I've come up with, this conviction integrity and transparency unit, that'll be focused on wrongful convictions, making sure prosecutors are turning over evidence and being transparent in all phases of this process, is having people that have been involved in the justice system. Not everybody's gone 16 years in prison like Jeff and somehow went to law school afterwards and now are practicing lawyer and an advocate. I mean, but certainly people like Jeff and others that have that experience, I want them involved, because that's just best practices. You have people from around the spectrum weighing in on these important and critical issues.
Jeff, I just want to jump in and quickly mention two things that, in terms of, courts looking at prosecutorial misconduct and seeing, well, there's enough other evidence to convict. I want to say the flaw in that is once prosecutorial misconduct has infected a case, it changes the entire landscape and trajectory of the case, and there really is no way of saying whether or not somebody would have been convicted or not, although the courts engage in that type of analysis. And that's why it's critical that the district attorney not allow that. In terms of the merits of the conviction review unit, you can achieve breathtaking results with those units when it's a real unit staffed by real people who really are dedicated at finding wrongful conviction cases, reinvestigating them. For context, in Brooklyn, when Ken Thompson was elected on a wrongful conviction plank, 23 people were exonerated in 2.5 years. Philadelphia DA Larry Krasner, his office has exonerated 14 people in their 14 months. And even before that, the Dallas District Attorney, Craig Watkins, 40 people being more than 40 exonerated. So you could never get that kind of result from the nonprofit field or outside. So having a real unit within the office is critical. In my case, they didn't have a unit. And as a result of that, I was repeatedly blocked from getting DNA testing, and all the issues I was raising on appeal, including my innocence, referencing the pre-trial DNA exclusion, they didn't hesitate for a second in fighting those appeals. If there was a unit in place like that, then they would have looked at that, because that's an innocence issue.
Absolutely. And in regards to even Jeff's case, and I've seen on Netflix the Innocence Files, and really focuses on wrongful conviction. So other than kind of what we already discussed at the commission and being reviewed and stuff, what else would you do to help prevent wrongful convictions? Now, I know that nothing's ever going to be 100%, but you want to get as close to 100% as possible to prevent that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other key thing that we haven't discussed is the creation of a police misconduct database within the office, and these more proactive and successful conviction integrity units, like Jeff has mentioned, in Dallas and in Philadelphia and in Brooklyn. Part of this process is also creating a database making it publicly available of police officers that have cut corners. I mean, this whole phenomenon of testifying or testifying falsely under oath. Look, that's been going on for a long time. We can talk about other wrongfully convicted people. Frankie Carrillo was on the Innocence Files, of course, and this was a reflection of detectives again focusing on just getting that conviction, locking someone up, no matter who it was, closing that case file, and that leads to a lot of either false testimony, not disclosing evidence they should, pushing witnesses to say stuff they didn't want to say, coerced confessions. And so creating a database with officers who have engaged in that unprofessional, unethical, and unacceptable conduct is another key way to ensure that justice is being done and that we're not putting anybody behind bars that shouldn't be there.
Jeff, I just want to add that the really important thing of having that database and making it public is that if a defense lawyer has that information, that's critical information for the defense lawyer to then be able to question the credibility of the officers involved. So that's certainly relevant. Separate from that, I've had prior conversations with Matt, and in terms of preventing wrongful convictions, he expressed to me a commitment to study, have there be a study done whenever anyone is exonerated from Albany County or even anywhere else in New York or even nationally, that there would be people that would study that case and see what lessons could be extracted from them in order to prevent other wrongful convictions from happening in the same way. So there's that aspect. And I also want to mention that, the wrongful conviction prevention legislation, which the district attorney can weigh in on and give their opinion, that's also a significant way of preventing future wrongful convictions because it would result in mandating best practices. So far, with all of the reforms, there has not one district attorney that is ever expressed to the legislature, we want this reform to be passed. It's always fighting against it. Matt, you want to just comment on those two facets that I mentioned?
Yeah, I'd like to do everything in my power as an elected DA, particularly again right here in the state's capital in Albany, to help advocate for progressive criminal justice reform that brings more fairness to the process. I'm really unsure why there is pushback on that. I don't think that these progressive reforms result in cases being dismissed or people not being caught or less safety. I think what they promote is a more fair system and which promotes more safety for everybody. And so, I'm happy to advocate for any legislation to that effect, Jeff. I've said that and I plan to do what I say and be accountable and walk the halls. And I'm really looking forward to doing that.
Hey, last thing, Jeff, I want to mention that in terms of safety, every time the wrong person is convicted, it leaves the actual criminal free to strike again. That's what happened in my case. I did 16 years wrongfully in prison for the murder and rape, which I didn't commit. And the actual perpetrator killed the second victim 3.5 years later, who had 2 children and was a school teacher.
It's crazy that happens. And Matt, you talked earlier about coerced confessions and people confessing the crimes they didn't commit. And there are a lot of people out there, and I used to be one of them, that didn't think that ever happened. That if you confess to a crime, you did it. And when I first met Jeff and heard his story, and I know it's another topic, but to let the people know this is real, this really happens. And not only Jeff, but other people in Jeff's worldwide net who it's happened to. So it's scary that this stuff goes on and that it actually happens. It's horrifying.
Yeah. Look, and again, it's a culture shift. When we're realizing that wrongful confessions and coerced confessions happen as a result of really, terrible and awful, failed and old aggressive police procedures. Jeff's not the only individual. What we're talking about is the Central Park 5. You're talking about interrogations that would go on for 5 hours, involve physical harm. It was almost like torture aspects being applied here to get a confession, to get an arrest, to get a conviction, to close a case. And again, if you're focusing on winning and convicting, and you're not focusing on the truth, you're going to miss the truth. And the consequences, I think, are, as we've explained here, are just awful, tragic, and should never be accepted.
Jeff, I want to mention, just for viewers, to share with them that the National Registry of Exonerations, which documents all of the exonerations across the country, they have now, they're over 2,500 that they've cataloged. And I want to mention that coerced false confessions have been the cause of wrongful conviction in 25% of the DNA-proven wrongful convictions.
Yeah, and what the DA can do is, I mean, you know, I've certainly been vocal on the fact, and we do have the confessions up here in Albany by the majority of the police departments are on video, or the interviews, you know, with detectives. And certainly, you know, any cases that don't have this video evidence of interrogations, I think are going to be looked at very critically while we are advocating at the Capitol to make sure that we are recording those interviews. Because as you can imagine, Jeff, you get an individual who gets, you know, look, who's in a vulnerable community, less access to resources, you know, they are probably more prone to being convinced, coerced to close out a case. And so, again, we're talking about best practices here. We're talking about ensuring fairness and truth in the system.
Matt, in the 3 or 4 minutes.
Give me just mention one quick thing on that. Just speaking to that point, my interrogation was not videotaped, and the cops were able to leave the threat and false promise out of their testimony. I'm going to say that the current law in New York, which mandates videotaping of interrogations, there are exceptions for sex offense cases, drug cases, and second-degree murder. So those are we want to eliminate those exceptions legislatively. And so in that aspect of it, Matt's campaign is exciting to me because we would have an advocate in the DA's office encouraging the legislature to get rid of those exceptions.
Hey, real quick, Matt, in the 3 or 4 minutes we have left, you know, who are some of your biggest supporters, you know, some people who are endorsing you that you have, and if people want to find out more about you, how can they do that?
Sure. So, you know, the campaign was really sort of helped gain some real traction with the Working Families Party, which is a national organization that has endorsed Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and that builds coalitions, diverse coalitions across different spectrums of people and platforms. And they've been critical to the campaign, the Working Families Party, and they endorsed very early on. These are the same people that also endorsed Tiffany Caban for Queens DA, and other progressive district attorneys across the country. Beyond that, we have some local support from the Albany County Young Democrats. It's the local Democratic party, but of the younger generation, which, you know, these are more the progressive people, typically younger people. Certainly, you know, I'm 34 running for district attorney here and just trying to bring a different approach. And I think that's because, you know, I'm more open-minded and critical of how things are and asking why they can't be different. And so the Albany County Young Democrats are supportive. And then also some local well-known activists. Barbara Smith is a nationally known feminist author and writer, and she was asked to endorse Bernie's campaign, and she did, and she's endorsed my campaign. And, you know, importantly, as we're talking about wrongful convictions here, the political action group, It Could Happen to You, has endorsed the campaign, you know, which really means a lot to me because, again, this conviction, integrity, and transparency unit is really a marquee piece of my platform. Because I think it'll bring a whole different culture to the whole office, focusing on truth and not just convictions, and being transparent with the public. And so beyond those groups, we just have some good support from Citizen Action, a local grassroots political organization, the boots on the ground, so to say. These are the people that would be hitting the doors if we could outside of a pandemic, but they're the people that are, you know, hammering on the phone, speaking to voters right now about the campaign. So a lot of good broad support that I'm really proud of.
Well, Matt and Jeff, you know, thanks again for allowing me to interview you today. Of course, you're always welcome back as things progress and want to get some more information out there that's important for people to know. And thanks again for being on the show today on 360 Degrees of Success.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Jeff.
Thank you.